And because really that's what it comes down to in the due diligence period is they tell you something, verify. Everything needs to be backed by a document to verify. And it's not just any document. You need to check the veracity of that document, how relevant, how timely, is it done properly, and so on and so forth. Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. And today, I am very pleased to have an episode where we're going to be talking about due diligence, the importance of properly doing your homework before you buy a property. There's so many things that need to be looked at, and so many ways that you can really ensure you get to know what you're buying. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's really relevant to you because you might be in the process of buying a property, you're looking to buy one, or you're just looking educated and you may be able to help somebody else. So before we jump into it, a few things. I want to remind you all that the Real Estate Effect is also a community. You can join our patron page. I organize events. I organize one-on-ones, like patrons and myself. We do some online events, and we in-person events. We had dinner with some of them last week. In fact, it was really fun. We had a great time, and I look forward, and I'm happy to sit down and take a bit of time to look at some of the deals that you're working on, if that could be helpful. And I can also refer you some professionals that I work with. I'm sure you're looking for some architects, accountants, lawyers, whatever. I'm happy to open up my contacts to you. So join the patron community. Then on April 20th, with the Real Estate Investors Club, we're holding an event here in Montreal at the Courtyard Marriott in Ville Saint-Laurent. I'll put the details and the address in the show notes. It's on April 20th. The doors open at 6:30. We will have one speaker. We're going to have an appraiser from Colliers that we're going to be speaking with, and she's going to tell us a lot of important points on how it is to work with an appraiser and what we can do to raise our property value. And then we have also a surprise guest that I will not announce yet. You'll have to come and see. And I will also put the link in the show notes where you can register for the event. And I hope to see you there. And come and introduce yourself. Let's have a handshake. Let's maybe even have a drink together. And I'll be happy to meet you. So there you go. That's for all the social stuff. So join our patrons and come to the event on April 20th, a couple of weeks from now. Now, today we said we're going to talk about due diligence. Due diligence is not something that people like. It's not fun, yet it is absolutely crucial to do it properly. The due diligence is really is defined as the period in once you have an accepted offer that you do your homework in your background check, your criminal check on the property. Like, what is the property that you're really buying? So you're buying some expenses, you're buying some revenues, you're buying a plot of land, you're buying a building, you're buying a set of bylaws through the municipality. And so there's a whole bunch of items that need to be looked at. And we all know, some of us at least, maybe you're the I was gonna say the nerd type. I shouldn't say that. Don't take it as an insult if it is. There's a lot of people who want to do analysis. They never really pull the trigger and to make an offer. But once you do have an accepted offer, you actually have to move forward. There's deadlines that you have to go by in order to respect the contract that you sign, which is the offer. So really the objective of that due diligence period is to find out everything there is to know about what it is that you're buying. You need to know what it is that you're buying, what condition it's in, because it'll allow you to assess the price that you're paying for it, make sure you're paying the right price, and also it'll help you to avoid making some costly mistakes. I will share some stories about that. We've all gone through it. We didn't do enough due diligence, and then we will buy something happens, and it ends up costing us, and then we say, oh my God, I could have found that out in the due diligence, and I didn't. So with every transaction, we learn. And again, being thorough on the due diligence helps you get a better perspective of the project, the property that you're buying, to make sure that you have it at the correct price. And it's a great way to go back and renegotiate the price once you found out certain items. And we're going to get to that in a few seconds. First of all, there's documentation, right? You need to make sure that you respect all of them. First, there's a deadline for the seller to provide you all the documents. Once you have all the documents, you need to start your verification. It's important to let them know in writing, like once you've received all the documentation. And a little trick for me is that I kind of like always kind of keep asking for something like that. It's never really over. But then once you have all the documents, depending on where you're at and the terms you put, in most cases, I think it's about 10 days, 10 days or 2 weeks. I mean, you have to go check on your offer. And again, it's important to put in writing. Just might be as simple as sending an email to your agent and just letting him know that you confirm receipt of all the documents and that you're happy with it, that you have everything that you need in order to be able to start to do your work. I said there's like documents that you need, right? You need first to look at all of your revenue, your income, then all your expenses, and then a whole bunch of other things. Now, in order to be able to do these things, you just need simple documents, right? Like on the income, really just, start with the listing. They say on the listing that the property makes $100,000 a year in revenue. Okay, let's go look at that. So now you need obviously the detailed rent roll. So each unit rents for $1,000 a month, and those are the dates of the lease. This is the name of the person, and so on and so forth. So you have to make sure that the rent roll is complete. If the unit it's a 10 unit building, then you need to have 10 apartments rented with the amount. Now, it's not enough just to look at their rent roll. You need to actually have a copy of the lease. Okay, you ask for the document. In Quebec, we have a beautiful blue form, the standard lease. That's what you should be asking for. And obviously, the renewal letters, because some of those leases might be a bit old. So you need to be able to check. The rent roll says it's 1,050. That person signed a lease at 1,000, and that was a year ago. They've now been increased by $50. They are now at 1,050. So for each unit rented, you need to be able to verify the increases to find out exactly what it is from the original lease. If that person's been there for 3 years, there should have been 3 letters, 3 increases, and obviously you need at least the latest one that shows what their current rent is. Okay. And then you also need to look at other evidence of the other income. So for example, if they list a certain amount for laundry, okay, show me. Do you have a receipt? Do you have a bank deposit? Do you have something? Same thing for parking. Parking, it's sometimes, oh, well, he just gets to use it. Okay, but is it included in the lease? Does he pay an extra $100 a month to be able to use that spot? Do you have a separate document? In some cases, it won't necessarily be on the lease. They'll just do a separate sheet, like an appendix, and I allow tenant in unit 201 to rent parking spot number 3 for $100 a month, according to on the same terms of the lease number, blah blah blah. So everything needs to be backed by a document. There needs to be a paper trail. Otherwise, how else could you possibly know? This person tells you like, oh, the building makes $100K a year. Well, because you'll find out stuff. They missed a renewal letter. Oh, they've actually didn't increase that person by that amount and stuff like that. So you need to verify everything. And in some cases for the revenue, I've even seen people ask for the bank records of the account that manages the property to make sure that those deposits have actually been done in the bank, because that shows the money trail, the paper trail. Okay, you say you collect in 10 apartments at $1,000 a month, so show me bank records that show 10 deposits of $1,000 a month, because that really does make it official. In some cases, sellers will not be open to do that because, wow, I manage multiple buildings on the same bank account. It's not relevant to you. Okay, well then how can you really show me that that's what actually you've collected? And because really that's what it comes down to in the due diligence period is they tell you something, verify. Everything needs to be backed by a document to verify. And it's not just any document. You need to check the veracity of that document, how relevant, how timely, is it done properly, and so on and so forth. Now, same thing for the expenses, okay? Usually you look at Centris, you look at the MLS, you find listings where there's revenue, Then there's taxes and insurance, and then there's nothing else. It's like there's no other expense for the property. Well, guess what? The reality is that there is a lot more than that. So out of the long list of the expenses, the most important really are obviously the property and school taxes, and that you can just go online and find them. It's public information in Quebec, and I'm pretty sure everywhere in Canada. You just go on the city's website, you type in the address, and then you're able to right there and then get the taxes. Now you can ask for the invoice of the insurance policy. Okay, you say you pay $5,000 a year of insurance. Show me. Now, in some cases, insurances, they issue the policy, but they also issue a payment schedule. And there's no like particularly secret information on that. So people should be willing and able to share this. So it does show that, you pay $5,000 a year, and here's the schedule. I think it would work out to $430 a month or something like that, times 10, a little bit less. Anyways, you get the picture, right? 5,000 divided by 12. And it's not always linear straight. Sometimes the first month is a little bit more because you pay the broker fee, and so on. Okay, on the expenses, there's also telecom, so telephone and Wi-Fi. So telephone, often if you have, depending on the building size, if you have a fire alarm, you're required to have a phone connection. And then same thing for the intercom. And then also for the Wi-Fi, if you provide Wi-Fi, then you have an invoice with your internet provider that we all know, which I won't name. And then if they say, okay, it's $2,000 a year, okay, show me the invoice. And now when people show you an invoice, always be wary when they show you 1 month of invoice, because it's not always the same amount. So just to say, well, here's the month of January, you can just multiply that by 12, I find is not enough. And often with these companies and providers, it's pretty easy actually to get a yearly statement. So they should be able to provide that to you. So same thing for electricity. Electricity, they say, oh, it's so $3,000 a year. Okay, show me. And same thing, like the electricity for Hydro-Quebec, you can actually go on their website and type an address and see what the consumption is. So that's something that you're able to assess on your own. And that's really important. And again, as we walk through this list, it's important to also think like the ability and the speed at which the seller can provide it to you shows how organized they are. And how organized they are also usually reflects how transparent and honest they're going to be in disclosing the full real expenses. And I'll give you some examples. So then same thing for oil and gas. So depending if it's a gas furnace or an oil furnace, they have a supplier. They fill up that tank maybe 3 times a year, once per quarter, or what. So ask for those invoices, and don't just ask an invoice for 1 quarter. You have to see at least 1 year's worth. In most cases, it's even better to ask for 2 years worth of expenses, because from 1 year to the next, it may not always be the same amount. Imagine like last winter was very mild and they didn't need to turn on the heating so much, then it would appear as a very low expense. Whereas the previous year was maybe very cold, they burnt more fuel, higher expense, and you need to know that. Then the laundry room, if there's any expenses related to that, is it their machines? Do they rent the machines? Is there a rental? Show me the rental contract. Same thing with snow removal and lawn. Snow removal, depending on who it's by, is it the janitor who lives in the building, the caretaker? Is it an outside company? If it's an out company, you have a yearly invoice. Usually, it goes from 1st of November to April 30th. It's a set amount, $800. Show me the invoice. And if possible, show me 2 years worth of invoice. And one of the things with that is that then you get to know who they're dealing with right now, because that supplier, that snow removal company, they already know the property. If you just want to continue with them, it might just be better and easier and cheaper than you having to find another one. So same thing for waste, depending on where you are. Sometimes, garbage is just, you pay for it through your city taxes, but sometimes you have a contract for larger buildings. There's a contract with waste removal companies. So then you need to check that amount as well. Ask for the yearly invoice, if possible, 2 years worth. Now, management is something that should be normalized through the CMHC standard. I think right now it's about 5%. Always ask, hey, who do you deal with for management? How is the contract structured? Oh, they take 4.5% of revenue. Okay, perfect. would you mind sharing the contract with me? I just want to go over it to really be able to assess my expenses. Then same thing if you have some concierge services. And then lastly, also, like if you have any employee gratuities or bonuses or gifts and stuff like that. Sometimes, you have a caretaker that takes really a property manager that takes really good care of the property. And then, at Christmas time, you're happy to go give him $100 worth at the SAQ, or a trip to the Bahamas, depending on the property size. I've never done that, but it could be, all those things. So ask for the complete picture. Now, remember that the value of a property is directly related to how much it generates as revenue, as gross revenue, minus the expenses and the NOI, the net operating income. So there's always the tendency to want to artificially increase that NOI by maximizing revenue and reducing expenses. And sometimes reducing expenses also just means omitting some of them. And that's not good enough because you're going to have to pay it. You're going to be on the hook, right? So you need to find out exactly what it is as it happens. Other documents you may want to check, like, does the property come with movables? Is there a lawnmower? Are there tools? Are there anything else that comes on with the property that you should check? Maybe the windows were redone 2 years ago. Maybe the roof was redone a year ago, and guess what? You're still under warranty. So part of the due diligence, you also want to ask for the invoices for as many CapEx that was done. So capital expenditure, changing some windows, redoing a roof, redoing some foundations, drain, anything like that. Ask as much as possible for the invoices, because in a lot of cases, you still have a warranty. And you also want to be able to see which company did the work, because let's say 2 years later you have an issue, you can just call back the excavation company who did the foundation work and the French drain, right? Makes sense. So ask and try to obtain as much documentation, and then thoroughly verify that documentation. Is it the right address? Do the dates make sense? They're saying they redid the windows 2 years ago. Is the invoice from 2 years ago? Everything like that. So those are really important parts, but there's really some other documents to check. Like on top of that, you also need to check, obviously, your certificate of location. Usually for transaction in Quebec, it needs to be less than 10 years old, or if there's been any changes to the property that requires a new one to be done. So you have a certificate of location that's 3 years old, but the seller added a big terrace and a driveway in the back, and that's not on the certificate of location. Guess what? He needs to do a new one and provide it to you, because it's changed and it doesn't reflect the reality. And make sure that that certificate of location is signed. And that's a little tip here that I actually learned that recently, is that during COVID, a lot of it was sent just all electronically, but then in the mail, you're supposed to get your signed copy. Now, I don't know for you, but I've been pretty organized and I've always kept the digital copies that I've received from my land surveyor, but your notary asks for the original signed copy. So you need to take the one that you actually received by mail and then scan it to really show that it's signed by the land surveyor, l'arpenteur. Very important. Also, do you need to do some tests de pyrite? Do you need to do some tests de radon? Do you need to do some environmental, like phase 1, phase 2, depending on the size of the property, the history? I would always recommend in doing one whenever the seller provides you one, especially if they say, oh, yeah, it's okay, I have a phase 1 and a phase 2 from 6 years ago. I'm always weary that, because things have changed in the last 6 years, and maybe there's some contamination that arose, and it's also that standards are now tighter. It's not where it was 6 years ago, and what was allowed 6 or 10 years ago isn't really now, and you need to check that, because otherwise, if you don't, you're going to be stuck holding the bag of contamination. And you don't want that. So another thing to check is that building or property part of a housing complex? Because you may have some obligations towards your other co-owners. It's as if like your building, your property was it's like a condo being part of a syndicate, basically. So imagine you have a private street and like with 4 buildings around it, then it's actually those 4 buildings that pay for the snow removal of that street if you're part of a housing complex. This is something important. Talk about it with your notary. He'll be able to let you know and advise if there's anything that you really need to prepare or look for or ensure if you're part of a housing complex. Also, part of the documents that should be provided to you that you need to thoroughly go through in due diligence is your seller's declaration. When a seller lists a property, they're supposed to provide you a form where they disclose a whole bunch of things. There's like 6 pages worth of questions about the property. Thoroughly read it, okay? Because when you're going to go visit, depending on what is it that they disclose, it also helps you guide what you're going to be paying attention to. If they tell you there's been some water damage on the foundations, well, when you're going to go visit underneath, then you're going to be more thorough and careful about looking out for this. They say there's never been any water infiltration. You check in some of the closets and, there's water marks, then, all those things. And where it's also interesting is that sometimes you can find gaps between what they say and what you see. And so someone that says like, oh no, there's never been any water problems. And then you look and on all the ceilings, there's water marks. It's like, come on, man, at least be honest. Anyways, that will also help you prepare for your building tour. You're going to go with an inspector because you need to get an inspection. The days of no condition, no inspection are now past. Well, in any case, you should never do that. Always go inspect. It's not for the cost of an inspection that you should cheapen out on it. So it's gonna help you to prepare for the exterior of the building, the overall general quality of the building, and everything that you can see from the outside. So things as simple as the roof and the flashing that you can see from the street. Like, does it look newish and in good shape? The doors and windows, do they seem recent? Have they been changed in the last couple of years? The garage door, any common areas, the balconies, what kind of shape are they in? One thing that I love to check is the grading of the ground going towards the building and the foundation. Is it negative? Like when it rains, is all the water going towards the foundation or going away from the building? Very important things to look at, because you will go with your inspector and he will be able to describe all these things, but you need to look at it. And the more walkthroughs, the more visits you do, the more of a critical eye you develop to be able to look at these things right from the get-go. So important. Then there's so many things in the visits that you should also be looking at. I'm not particularly going to go into it that much right now, because in a way that's like a whole other segment that we could do about what to look for when we do visits. Here's just where I'm just going to leave it at. Part of the research and the due diligence that you need to do is also with the tenants inside. Okay, when you do your visit, talk to them and ask them like, hey, what's so this is unit 2 or 3. Okay, great. Like what rent did you pay here? And you're organized, so you're going to go with the rent roll that you already verified against the lease and against the increases and the renewal letters. So then you know that when you visit a unit, if he's supposed to pay 1,050, let's just see if he says 1,050, and then what's included: heating, electricity, any appliances. And make sure that what they say and what's on the lease actually meets. Is it the same? This is what you have to verify. So another thing is the neighborhood. Talk to the neighbors, okay? Talk to the neighbors. It's amazing to see how many, I was going to say, elderly people they are who just spend time at their window, and they're just living cameras. They see everything. And so sometimes just by standing on the sidewalk and just kind of look around, you can spot someone who it seems like they're always looking out the window. So those are the people you want to talk to, and simply just go introduce yourself. Hey, my name is Axel. I'm a real estate investor. I'm interested in perhaps acquiring the property across the street. Could we take 2 minutes? I'd be happy to hear from you. Like, do you live here since a long time? Oh yeah, I've been here for 20 years and this and that. And in that building, there's been, so many drug problems. And last week again, the police was there and this and that. I was like, oh, really? Interesting. Tell me more. Let me know. And then just get them to talk and ask them questions. Like, what are the people like? Is it noisy? Do you see a lot of traffic? Are there families? What's the, tell me about the tenants. Tell me about the building. It's amazing what people will share that you would have never found out. And another one along those lines is actually to go and ask the police. You can go to the local police station and give them the address and ask them again, hey, I'm interested in acquiring the property. I just wanted to see like if there had been any recent activity over there that might be important that I know about. In some cases, they'll just open up their books and they'll let you know and keep it fairly anonymous and sterile information. They won't say which units, but if we've had to go visit, there's been some disturbance for domestic violence. I'm just making an example. I just hope it doesn't happen, but that might be something. And otherwise, they're going to say that you need to do une demande d'accès à l'information, so not a knowledge request. It's like there's a form that you have to fill up that basically says that you're requesting this information and they have to provide it to you, and so on and so forth. Also, part of the talking to people in the neighborhood is, hey, people across the street, like, have you had any water foundation issues? Yes. Oh yeah, we haven't. The entire street, there's sewage. Every time we have big rains, the sewage overflows and there's water problems. Oh, well, that would affect your property. It's good to know. So all those questions that aren't necessarily fun, but that are necessary. And another trip I would do is go to the municipality, go to the urbanism office of wherever the property is located, and do some research. So let's say this building is a 10 units. There's 10 apartments in there. Go and verify with the city that there is 10 registered addresses, because you'll be surprised sometimes with buildings that have odd numbers, that it was really a 10-unit building, but they added an 11th studio in the basement, and that studio isn't legal. So you could have some nasty surprises. And then if you buy it, it's up to you to make this situation normal. And you'll realize that you may have some like month, if not years of administration dragging just to get that last unit recognized. And then another one is also go check the zoning. And I'll share a little story with like that gentleman that I know was buying a house, and then checking the zoning, he realized that it was zoned for up to 16 units on that plot. So of course he bought the house and he sat on it for a couple of years, and eventually he demolished it and he built a big multifamily. So some brokers don't even realize that. So it's up to you as the buyer and as an avid, educated investor to go and do that research. Go check. Okay. Another big one, which obviously will be asked by your insurance, is flood. Are you in a flood zone? It's a tough one. It depends. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find out. For most municipalities, there is a map of what is considered flood zone and not. And then for the flood zone, I'm not an expert. Talk to your insurance broker. And this is for educational purposes only. What I've seen is that there's a map with like 1 in 10 years, 1 in 20 years, 1 in 50 years. And this is when it's supposed to regularly occur. So 1 in 50 years, 1 in 100 years is okay. You definitely don't want to be in a place where it's 1 in 10 years, because most likely you'll get it, 3 years in a row. So really be conscious and aware of that. And for some properties, like all of a sudden the flood zone gets moved and they're in it, like it really decreases property value. You don't want to be in that situation. Now, another thing to check with the municipality is also the number of parking spots required. Do you have the legal number? So sometimes it's, for multifamily, depending on the city, it might be like 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it's with a comma. So it's 1.5 parking spot per unit. And then for every 10 unit, you need 2 for visitors. I'm just making it up in terms of the numbers, but sometimes this is how it works. So make sure that you're in compliance with the number of parking spots, because that 5th parking spot on the side of the building is not legal, it's clandestine, it's not recognized, and it's actually on the way to the la ruelle, the back alley, and the fire truck needs to go through, so you cannot park there. That is not a real parking spot. So it's important for you to know that. And something else is issues and notices of non-compliance. This is obviously something that your seller would have to disclose right away, but sometimes they don't. And there's been a number of visits by the city for non-compliance. Often it's by the fire department because of fire alarm systems that haven't been upgraded. They're not at the new standard, or the existing equipment hasn't been maintained properly, or they did an inspection and they realized that some fire exits weren't to code, or they were just simply blocked and stuff like that. And that's really not something to play around, especially when we see what happened recently in Montreal. About a month ago, you may recall, in the old port, there's a building that burnt with several Airbnb units. Some of them, I think, were illegal. I really don't know the case well, but it made a big brouhaha, and people died. You never want to be responsible for that. Do your work, do your research, do your due diligence. Never put yourself in that situation. When it comes to the fire, I mean, it's the repercussions could be absolutely drastic. Anyways, I'll close that bracket. So another thing to check with the city is also grants. Is there anything that you can get from the municipality if you want to do some renovation? There's several programs, and I'm thinking of Renault Climat, Renault. There's another one for the city of Montreal for renovation. If you want to redo like your brick facade and your windows and stuff, you can get a certain amount of money. And you need to obviously check with the city on the program and how much you'd be applicable for. We kind of learned that the hard way when we renovated our duplex in Verdun, where we found out we'd be eligible for some of those grants, but because we had started some of the work and they weren't able to inspect how it was before, then we weren't eligible anymore because we had started the work. So anyways, and that also goes hand in hand. If you're going to be doing some of that work, then you're going to want a building permit. So if your seller did some work recently that required a building permit, ask him, hey, did you get one? Do you have a copy of it? Can you yeah, of course I did one. Can you show me a copy? Well, I don't have it. Well, you should have it in your email. Anyways, just check, trust, but verify. Actually, don't really trust, just verify everything. Now, there's a whole set of other things that could be in the if it's a condo, and same thing. I'm not going to go into this right now. Send me a message if you want to hear about condo. I could just do a whole episode about that because we've definitely had some experiences with condos, condo syndicates. I was also the president of a condo syndicate for 3 years, so I knew knee deep what that meant. So let me know if you have any questions about that. I just want to share a few things. Like, I've done my fair share of due diligence, and the expenses, people minimizing the expenses is always a classic. And I've heard of one recently. I've never had it because I've never bought a building that was heated by oil. But basically the seller had 2 different suppliers. And when in the due diligence, he only gave the yearly invoices for one of the suppliers. So then the expense would be half of what it really was, because he was kind of splitting about half. And then you can just imagine then how the buyer buying this property, all of a sudden the year after, like if he just sticks to that amount that was disclosed to him, I mean, he's done midway through the year. So you really have to check and see if it makes sense and compare to other buildings. Another one is to talk to, if there's a janitor, a concierge, or a caretaker, really talk to them in depth and make them understand, like, hey, if you do you like this job? Basically, are you good at it? And that's for you to assess if maybe they'd be able to continue. And just things as simple as, tell me about the clientele, tell me about the tenants, and their payment habits. Is it the caretaker that does the rent collection or not? Does he know them? Does he have a relationship with them? What about the vacancy rate? Like, the owner says it's 100% rented. Is that true? Like, what was the last unit that you had to rent and when was it? Oh, well, this year I had to re-rent 3 and one of them is still vacant. Like, oh, I didn't know that. So it's important to know also the history of the building. Since how long have you been here? For how many years have you taken care of this building? Because then sometimes those people are like walking encyclopedias and they know everything that happened over the last 15 years. You're the 3rd owner they see. And it's up to you to see, do you want to keep working with them or not? And these people also know firsthand what kind of work they get called for for service calls. Oh, in the ground floor units, we always have problems with water infiltration on the outside wall. Okay, tell me more. Water seepage, structure, insulation, heating, anything relevant. Talk to them; they will know. And one thing that's important in that case is that if they complain about, like, you have to establish what their responsibilities have been. Are they just in charge of taking the garbage out and sweeping the entranceway, or do they also do the leasing? Because when they also do the leasing, then they have to put up, I was going to say, with the tenant that they select. So it's also an interesting conversation to see how that process works. Most likely they don't take care of it themselves and it's somebody else, but just basically talk to them. It's important in your due diligence to find out as much as you can about the property. How does it work? Tell me everything. And whenever they say something, interesting, tell me more. So there you go. That's a good sum up. I'm actually considering doing a second part for this because there's plenty of other things to talk about, but that gives you a fair rundown of most items to look for to be able to confirm all the income and confirm all the expenses, and then find out everything you can about the overall state of the building, its history, and how it stands versus the legality of the local code of the city, the municipality, the number of dwellings, conformities, and so on and so forth. So I hope this was helpful, and thank you very much. Stay tuned. I'm gonna do another part like that. I'll share more, and then let me know if you have some questions. It's always helpful. I'm looking for topics. I'm looking for guests. If you want to recommend people, and Shua did recently. Thank you very much, and shout out to you. So thank you very much. Stay tuned for more. Thank you, and talk to you next week. All right, signing out. Thank you.